Hey, welcome back to this study of Joshua. This is Allen. I'm Josh, and today our study takes place in Joshua chapter 10. I would like to remind everyone, as usual, if you have not had an opportunity to read Joshua chapter 10, take a moment, hit the pause button, and read it. Or if you're just joining us now, I'd encourage you to go back to the introduction and listen to the previous episodes in order to get caught up so it makes a little more sense as we go. Allen, how you doing?
Oh, I'm doing great. Enjoying this study very much.
Well, it makes two of us. What do you have?
All right, let's get into the keys for the chapter for Joshua 10. This is one of the most interesting chapters of the book because it's where the sun stands still. That's the title we're giving it, the day the sun stood still. Key verse is verse 13, which we'll emphasize in a minute. Then the key thought that's seen throughout this chapter about 7 or 8 times. The Lord fought for Israel, starting in verse 8, 10, 11, 12, 14, 19, 25, 30, 32. That's a thought that runs throughout the chapter. Now, there are 43 verses in chapter 10, and they divide into 5 sections. 1 to 5 is the Canaanite vendetta, because the Canaanites are now going to attack the Gibeonites because they made the covenant. Mm-hmm. They thought of it first, and they're mad because, hey, they're turncoats. They joined the other force now. So they're not attacking Israel, they're attacking the Gibeonites. Well, that's Canaanite vendetta, 1 to 5. Then 6 and 7, allies plea. Now that Gibeon is an ally to Joshua and the nation of Israel, they come to them and say, hey, they're going to attack us. You got to help us. So they're pleading for help from an ally. 8 to 15, God's solution to it. And that's the sun stands still part. And then 16 to 27, King's burial in the cave that they had made their hideaway. And then 28 to 43, Joshua's campaign. So we'll see that we've now left the central campaign and we're moving into the southern campaign of the conquering of Canaan. So that was the order. Divide first, so the central campaign goes south, southern campaign, and then they go back and mop up in the northern campaign. So that's where we are. A couple of things I want to notice just by overview first. You may remember that we mentioned earlier the legend to the marks on the screen that you're seeing. I'll just highlight, instead of all of them again, I'll just highlight that the last one, the orange box, it indicates people or groups. Mm-hmm. And so I'm going to mark some of those here in the first part. So you have Adonai Zedek. Adonai, that's a title, not a name. You see it in different context. But Adonai Zedek, king of Zedek, is sort of the ramrod or the leader of this coalition. The other kings are listed in verse 3, Hoham, Piram, Japhia, and Deber. So there's a list for your next 4 kids right there. I want to jump ahead and see the other overview. So in verse 13, we've been circling the number of the key verse each time. So that's our key verse. We've also been putting the blue circle around the key word of the chapter or the key phrase. And it is also in verse 13, the sun stood still. The sun stood still. And I use these 2 red exclamation points to indicate God working a miracle and indicating, so I put all 3 marks beside verse 13. So that's our key verse of this chapter when God caused the sun to stand still. Now, I think that's all we'll note with the highlights. So let's go into the verse by verse. We won't read 43 verses together, but I do want to read the verses to get the flow of the text and then the verses that have notes to be made. Notice in verse 1, it came to pass when Adonai Zedek, king of Jerusalem, had heard how Joshua had taken Ai. So the message is getting around. They're very interested in this campaign against the Canaanites and utterly destroyed it. as he had done to Jericho and her king, so he had done to Ai and her king, and how the inhabitants of Gibeon had made. So they're on a roll here.
Right.
One success after another. Made peace with Israel and were among them. Now, to Adonai-Zedek, that was a matter of advantage from a Canaanite's perspective because they're protected. But from a spiritual perspective, that was dangerous to have Canaanites living among you. So you can make the note there, dangerous for God's people, 2 Corinthians 6:17, which says, come ye out from among them and be ye separate, saith the Lord. So that's the opposite of what God wanted. And then also 1 Corinthians 15:33, the reason for it is evil communications corrupt good morals. So having Canaanites that have a different philosophy, worldview, morality, being constantly around you, exposed to that. I think about, this table, you could say, well, that gives us an opportunity for evangelism or we'll influence them. Sometimes.
Right.
But here's a table. If someone were standing on this table and someone equal size standing on the floor and they were in a tug of war, who's going to pull the other one where he is? It's easier to pull somebody down than it is to pull somebody up. Mm-hmm. And that's true with society. That's true with if you yoke yourself unequally to a child of the world, then is it going to be easier for you to bring them where you are or for you to be taken? And that's what happens here. Now, evangelism, of course, but evangelism is a factor here, but evangelism is more on the same level. You're not giving an advantage to somebody by giving them constant access to you, by giving them authority over you, like he's talking about 2 Corinthians 6.
Well, in the locale, you don't go to a bar to evangelize. You hopefully bring the person out of the bar.
Good point. Good point.
Absolutely.
And I think it's normally easier to have success in evangelism to do one-on-one or one-on-two and not one Christian against a dozen unbelievers.
Very good.
Because they'll team up or they'll support each other. There won't be as much honest, open study of Scripture in that context, in my judgment. Right. All right, the next note that a couple of notes in the next couple of verses. I made the symbol there of greater than, Gibeon greater than Ai. So they knew what Joshua had already discovered about Ai. It's a little place, So Jerusalem and these other larger cities, they were like, well, they beat Ai, but that's not that big a deal. But when the Gibeonites said, we can't beat them, we better join them, then that really got their attention. So because it was greater than Ai and all the men thereof were mighty. So I made the symbol there of Gibeon greater than Ai. And then in verse 3, wherefore Adonai-Zedek, he was an Amorite. You go back to the 7 nations. So he's an Amorite. And we said that Gibeah was a Hivite city. So these are two competing or warring tribes. They don't have. It's not like another town up the road that's your same people, your same nation. It's another people, even though they live pretty close by. So they're going to attack them. Verse 4, come up unto me and help me that we may. Now this is Gibeon asking Joshua for assistance. Come up. This is Adonai-Zedek saying to his coalition, I got ahead of myself, come up here and help me. Let's go attack Gibeon. So I wrote above the word Gibeon, why? Why are you attacking Gibeon when they're no threat to you? Why aren't you attacking Joshua? He's the problem, or Israel. That's who's out to get you. That's the army that's coming, but they've gotten sidetracked. So I made 2 notes in verse 4. One is why above Gibeon, and the last phrase, the children of Israel, I put above that, the real threat. The real threat. And you could put 9:2 as your commentary Joshua 9:2. Then verse 5, therefore the 5 kings of the Amorites, the king of Jerusalem, the king of Hebron, the king of Jarmuth, Lachish, Eglon, gathered themselves together and went up, and all their hosts, and encamped before Gibeon, and made war against it. 3 notes there. The first one is sidetracked leaders. That would be Adonai-Zedek. He said, we're going to go attack Gibeon. Well, that's a bad idea. Why are you doing that? So then he says, go with me. And they say, okay. So the lesson is sidetracked leaders sidetrack others. That's the power of leadership. Mm-hmm. Now, if you have a church that's sidetracked, what's the purpose of the church?
Seek and save the lost.
Yes. The church is a worshiping society who is tasked with evangelism. Mm-hmm. Those are our 2 purposes. Now, evangelism has 3 ways to do it. One is benevolence, earn the right to have a Bible study by helping people like Jesus did. Edification, keeping your members strong and connected so they can be evangelists. And so you don't let them go out the back door when you bring them in the front door. You're not doing any real evangelism there. Right. And the third is what we call evangelism, going with the gospel. But all 3 of those are for the same purpose of saving souls. Now, if you have a church that has lost its focus of scriptural worship and has turned inward instead of outward, you got elders that are more focused on us. Mm-hmm. Than on, here's a church of 400 members. They baptized 3 people last year. What? Mm-hmm. They've lost focus. A church of 400 ought to be able to baptize dozens of people if they're giving that the focus. Right. And 3 is probably just 3 from the young people's group. You really haven't done any evangelism outside the families evangelizing their own kids at all. Well, that's not healthy. And but if you've got elders that are focused on the wrong things, the church will be. Mm-hmm. So sidetracked leaders sidetrack others. So we want to get our leader. You want to change a congregation? Educate the leadership. Get them to turn their minds the right direction. Then they will influence the congregation. So there's a lesson to be learned there in verse 5. Then again in the same verse, I see the power of influence in that verse. So 1 king says to 4 kings, let's go. And they go. That's influence. Right. So everybody has influence. Some have more than others, but there's no man lives to himself, no man dies to himself, Romans 14:7. So you have influence with your family. You have influence with your friends. You have influence where you work. You have influence in your congregation. Now, some people have a lot more influence, but use your influence for good. Now, the last note is at the end of verse 5. Sin pulls us farther and farther in. You see, Gibeon, Joshua and the princes agreed to Gibeon. Mm-hmm. We said that was a sin. That was a mistake. Why did they do that? Now they made that mistake. Guess what? That mistake is leading them to more problems. Now they're entangled with Gibeon being attacked. It's like now they got pulled into somebody else's battle because they allied with them. So you could put Deuteronomy 7:1-26 there would fit. Now, I drew a line from the word Amorites in verse 6 back up to Adonai-Zedek in verse 3. That's how we know that he was an Amorite, because it says that all the kings of the Amorites that dwell in the mountains are gathered against us. So that's how we know where they, what nation they were of. That gets us then down. Joshua agrees to help them. Verse 7, he ascends up to Gilgal and all the men of war with him. Verse 8, the Lord said to Joshua, all right, now you think about from God's perspective, this is going to work out pretty well. Right. Let's ask the question, is it easier to make 5 battles and capture 5 kings or to make 1 battle and capture 5 kings? Well, You see how this works for God's purposes. Fear them not, for I have delivered them into thine hand. There shall not a man of them stand before you. Don't be afraid, even though there's a coalition of 5 kings. They're not equal to me. I will give them to you. So it's easier to conquer all 5 together than one by one. The next note that I have is in verse 9. This is some of the battle strategy of Joshua. Joshua therefore came unto them suddenly and went up from Gilgal all night. I enjoy studying history and military leaders. This reminds me of Patton. The most feared Allied general for the Germans was Patton, because he showed up. Remember, this was before reconnaissance and all the gadgets and cameras and satellites and everything we have today. You can't get away with this today. Right. But back then, he would show up where they didn't expect him to be. It's like he was just. Now, you go back and you read how he got there. He drove his men relentlessly. They marched all day, all night, 2 days straight to be where he was, right? Well, or where they ended up. That's why they couldn't. How in the world did he get here so fast? Well, in his mind, he saved soldiers by surprise, because if they know we're coming, they're going to be ready. If they don't, fewer of us will die in the battle than if they don't know we're coming. So anyway, you had in the Civil War the same thing with Longstreet and Jeb Stuart. They cavalry. They would show up. I don't know, where in the world do they come from?
Washington and the Delaware.
Christmas. Yeah. Well, the same thing here. So this is good battle strategy. You see it with Joshua, but it's not Joshua that's doing ultimately is the reason for success. That's verse 10. The Lord discomfited them and slew them with a great slaughter, chased them along the way that go. So God's not doing the chasing, but he's empowering his people for the battle, and smote them to Azekah and unto Makkedah. Verse 11, it came to pass as they fled before Israel, they're going down to Beth-horon, that the Lord cast down great stones from heaven. Now this is the Lord fighting for them. Great stones from heaven unto them, unto Azekah, and they died. And there were more which died with hailstones than they whom the children of Israel slew with a sword. So if you're keeping score at home, God's up on Israel, right? So more people died with the rocks from heaven than from a spear or sword from an Israelite soldier. Verse 12, Joshua spake to the Lord when the Lord delivered up the Amorites before the children of Israel in the sight of all Israel. Sun, stand thou still upon Gibeon. That's the city, not the people. And thou, moon, in the valley of Ajalon. So he's making a request that they can keep fighting. Timing is important in the battles too. Mm-hmm. And a lot of battles have been turned around on the second day after there was an opportunity overnight to recoup or to get reinforcements or to get settled in defensive positions, things like that. So if you can keep your enemy on the run, then that's advantageous. And here, that's what Joshua is asking the Lord for the opportunity to do. Now, verse 13 is this key great day, and the sun stood still and the moon stayed until the people had avenged themselves upon their enemy. So God just extended the daylight and allowed them to fight. Is not this written in the book of Jasher? The book of Jasher is an uninspired history book. We ought not be surprised that those were in existence, right? I mean, they could write, and they recorded things just like every society does. So there was an uninspired book of history that the Israelites who had the book of Joshua were familiar with, and many of them had read or they could consult. And basically Joshua is saying here, if you want to know more about it, it's also written. He's giving them another source.
Right.
Like a footnote says, see my other book, whatever, or see another source outside of what you're reading presently. And the sun stood still in the midst of heaven and hasted not to go down about a whole day. And there was no day like that before it or after it, that the Lord hearkened unto the voice of a man. If you prayed, God, don't let the sun go down today, That wouldn't happen. I mean, he wouldn't honor that prayer. It's not the same context. It's not the same time in history. Certainly, he never honored it for any other battles, but he did for Joshua. For the Lord fought for Israel. Romans 8:31, if the Lord be for us, who can be against us? Psalm 2, 1-6, he that sitteth in the heavens shall laugh. And then I mentioned in the introduction of the chapter that this phrase, the Lord fought for Israel, is found throughout the chapter. And so here, verse 14 is actually the fifth time, if you're going to mark them. But I wrote in here on the screen, I wrote the others, so you can transfer those if you want to. Now, if you're going to circle content or note content, key concepts here, you've got hailstones in verse 11. I just put a box around hailstones. And then the city of Gibeon and the cave of Makkedah, those are key locations in this battle. So what happens with the cave is that these 5 kings, they know they're whipped, and so they're trying to get away now. Mm-hmm. And they can't outrun the armies of Israel, so they hide. They find a cave. Everybody come in here. And so all the kings group together in a cave, but they are discovered. Like one of the Israeli soldiers, hey, look who I found. And tells, and it goes up the line until Joshua finds out about it. Hey, we caught the 5 kings and they're in a cave over here. So there's an interesting, I want to go, I think I'm going to stop there for a minute and go back and do some lessons. And then we'll catch back up in verse 18 momentarily. Well, let me give you, I'm going to come back to that one. Let me go back to verse 6 and give a study based on what the men of Gibeon said to Joshua, slack not thy hand from thy servants. Now, that's good advice for us, and that makes a good sermon title, Slack Not Your Hand. If you're paying attention to something, you got a good grip on it, then you don't let it slip out of your fingers. That's what they're saying. Don't let go of your grip. Slack not. So I sometimes use this illustration with Hebrews 2, 1-4 and Hebrews 6, 18, which says we have hope as the anchor of the soul, and we're to give urgent or diligent heed to our salvation from those 2 passages. When you think about hope is the anchor, where's the anchor? It's not here, it's in heaven. So we are a hold of the anchor rope. And that's where Hebrews 2, 1-3 comes in. Don't slack. Don't loosen your grip and fall off of the rope, because one day God's going to pull that rope from earth up to heaven, and you'll be salvaged, saved. You'll be relocated. So don't lose your grip. Now, here are some points, some other verses that use the same idea to develop a study or a sermon from. So Joshua 10:6 is Joshua, slack not thy hand. Then Luke 9:62, the followers of Jesus are not to slack, go back, to allow other responsibilities to take place, to take the priority over following Jesus. John 9:4, Jesus didn't. He said, I must work while it is day. So that's 10:6, Luke 9:62, John 9:4. And then these 3 that are good application verses for Christians. 1 Corinthians 15:58, be steadfast, unmovable, always abounding. So that's the same concept, don't slack. And then Ephesians 4:14, lift up the feeble hands. And then Galatians 6:9, be not weary in well-doing. So I think between those you have some examples and some precepts, to follow through. Now, I'm going to come back to those. I've got 12 lessons from this chapter, but I'm going to save those to the end, and we'll use that as a summary. I wanted to give you these three studies. Beginning in verse 9, this is a sermon called Teamwork to Victory. Teamwork to Victory. What we notice here is that Joshua the Lord and Israel are all involved in defeating the 5 kings. And I've drawn lines between these to connect them. But here are the 3 points. The title, Teamwork to Victory. The first point is church leaders, represented by Joshua. Church leaders. You're not going to rise above your leadership in the local congregation or in any organization. You only rise to your leadership, not above it. So church leaders are the first, and Joshua represents the same position in Israel society. The second one is providence. The Lord discomfited them. And in the parentheses, beside providence, write prayer, because prayer activates providence. So church leaders, that's the first part of the team. The second part of the team is the Lord, and we access the Lord by prayer. And then the third one is the church, and that's in verse 11. So 9 is Joshua, 10 is the Lord, 11 is Israel, and that represents the church. So if you're going to have success or victory in the church today, we have to have those 3 working together. Church leaders, the Lord, and the church. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you'll have good leadership, but nobody's following. You're not going to get very far. Sometimes you'll have eager followers, but not good leadership. You're not going to get very far. Sometimes you have those 2, but you forget the Lord. We don't pray much or any. Well, you're not going to have success long-term there either. So those are the 3 keys, the teamwork to victory, 9, 10, and 11. Now, the next study is down at verse 14. I really like this concept. It's one of those connecting the dots between different chapters, but the title of this one is There Was No Day Like. There was no day like, number 1, the day of creation. Genesis 1 through 31. Number 2, there was no day like the day of Calvary. Luke 23. Number 3, there was no day like the day of Pentecost. Acts 2. And there will be no day like the judgment day. Matthew 25, 31 to 33, and Revelation 20, the great white throne judgment, verse 12. No day like. I think that gives a preacher an opportunity to study some great concepts. And you could even do a series on that, 4 days like no other. And because really you can talk about creation, Calvary, Pentecost, and judgment. It's really hard to get all that in one sermon. So you can do a Sunday morning sermons in this month, 4 Sundays, and cover it in more detail. And this would be your introduction. Mm-hmm. The day the sun stood still was no day like it. So you go through that context briefly as your introduction. That story draws attention. People are interested in it. Like, oh, that's interesting. Yeah, that's interesting. So then you say, we're going to take this and apply it to no day like other days in history. And then you've brought them in, and now you're exposing them to content that help. You can talk about evolution with creation. That's important for all of us, but especially our young people, to be fortified against what they're going to face if they go to college. And then the others, you see how obvious that is. Now the next study is about time management, and this is the section that we had gotten to. So I want to read these verses, and then I'll come back to the application of it. Verse 18 and 19. So the message comes to Joshua. Somebody said, hey, look what I found. I got the kings. And that makes its way up to Joshua. We found the kings. They're in a cave over here. So how's Joshua going to handle that? Now, you mentioned him as a good leader. Mm-hmm. This is good leadership. He has a plan not to be diverted. You remember they just asked God for a long day. Mm-hmm. So what was a long day for? To be able to chase after the enemy and defeat them. And so he doesn't say, okay, everybody, let's go get the kings, and be diverted from it, distracted from it. Instead, he says in verse 19, stay ye not, don't stop. Don't stop, keep going. But pursue after your enemies and smite the hindmost of them. Suffer them not to enter into their cities. Well, why not?
That's where fortification is.
Fortification. If they get behind a wall, you're going to have a hard time getting. Right. That's a defensive position. It takes the death of many soldiers to overcome generally in battle. If It takes a lot more offensive soldiers than defensive soldiers if they're in a fortified position. So that's what you have here. It's more difficult if they're not in the open. For the Lord your God hath delivered them into your hand. He rained down hailstones and he gave us a long day. Let's keep focused on. He wants us to do this. All right. So I made a note at verse 19. Don't be distracted or detracted from the main mission. What's the main mission of the church? Well, we mentioned it earlier, get the gospel to the whole world. So what is your congregation doing to get the gospel to the world in this generation? That's the question every church needs to ask. Well, we put our services on, we live stream. Okay, well, that's great. That's a worldwide web, so people can watch it. But is that all you can do?
Right.
What about the money that's given on Sunday? We putting it in a bank and drawing interest on it? Well, we got some CDs and we got the people don't give money to be put in a CD account. I mean, you may have a special thing you're saving for, like building a building. You're going to save the Lord's money. It's good stewardship, not to borrow it. I get that. But generally speaking, the church isn't in the banking business. Right. We're in the soul saving business. So when that money's given, how can we use this to save more souls? Mm-hmm. We need to wake up. We need to wake up because that money's going to burn up. When the Lord comes back and elders and churches that put money in bank accounts and kept it there for 25 years and didn't spend it to save the gospel, when they get to Judgment Day, the Lord's going to say, that $25,000 would have saved 250 people.
Right.
But you put it in a bank and they're going to hell. That's a sober moment. I don't know how many people can be saved with $25,000. Somebody can. That'll support a missionary, and missionaries baptize people, and missionaries build churches. So we need to be careful that we don't get distracted from our main mission, which is evangelism. Second main mission of the church, and really this is first, is worship. Worship must not deteriorate into entertainment. It's not about checking a box that we've been to church. It's about worshiping God. It's about putting a smile on his face. It's about honoring him. And if I come to worship and get there late, I start getting the kids' coats on and backpacks, when I hear the preacher say in conclusion, I want to get out of here as quick as I can. And I sit and listen to everybody else sing, and I don't really sing. Or my mind is on the business deal I'm going to try to make tomorrow, or the shopping list that I've got for tonight. I'm not honoring God. I need to love God with all my heart, my soul, my mind, and my strength. Mark 12:30. Loving God in worship is loving him with your soul. It's the deepest part of you. And it requires concentration, attention.
Right.
Just because I'm sitting in a worship service doesn't make me a worshiper. Mm-hmm. No more than sitting in a hen house makes me a chicken. You can be in a place that you're not doing what the place was designed for.
Right.
Worship. So don't get distracted from that. We should be this is my opinion, my judgment, but we should be putting more time in planning our worship services. We should be doing a better job in orchestrating it and encouraging individual participation, giving everything we got to it. Somebody that's going to lead prayer the last Sunday of the month, he's known about that for 4 weeks because you put it on most assignments are on a monthly calendar. He's been preparing, he could have been preparing for that prayer for 4 weeks, but he walks up and he tries to think of what he's going to say on the way up to the podium or the mic. You're leading God's people into the presence of God. Mm-hmm. So what am I saying? Don't get distracted from the main point. Main point is worship. And then 1 Corinthians 10:31 is whatsoever you do to the glory of God. That's our main purpose. So Joshua doesn't get distracted. Now I want to make this application to time management, about time management here, because Joshua teaches us a good lesson. He is managing his time wisely because he's not getting distracted from his main mission by these other things, or by these kings. All right, so let's just paint the picture, put us in the story So you start the day, or you could change it to the week or the year. The time interim wouldn't matter. So you've got these things to accomplish today, week, year. So there are going to come opportunities to be distracted from that all throughout the day. In fact, I need to set my priorities before I even attack my list. You know, what's the one thing that I absolutely have to get done today,
Right.
or the three things? Now, let me talk about the principle of it, and then a way to assign priority. So the principle is we want to accomplish the most important things first. You could put down 10, 18, and 19 right here, where Joshua does that. He said the most important thing to do today is to conquer the Amorites and not the kings. We can take care of that later. So we prioritize the secondary after the primary. That's Psalm 90, 10-12. Teach us to number our days, that we may apply our hearts unto wisdom. Ephesians 5:16, redeeming the time, for the days are evil. So I read about Charles Schwab years ago, and this has helped me. He was president of Bethlehem Steel before he became famous for finances. But he had so many responsibilities, he didn't feel like he could get everything done. So there was a time management guru.
Mm-hmm.
He invited in, and he said, help me get more done. And so the time management expert says, okay, I want you to sit down, take a piece of paper, and write down all the things that you have to do today. And so Schwab sat down, spent about 15 minutes, and he wrote down everything. And he got up and walked back over where the time management expert was, and he tried to give him the paper. And he said, no, I don't need to see it. He said, I want you to go sit back down and take your list and number it in order of importance. So he went back, sat down, took a while, but he put a number 1 beside the most important thing down to like 21, the least important thing today. It took him a while, but he got back up and he tried to give him the paper. He said, no, I don't need to see it. He said, I want you to start with number 1, and when you finish it, go to number 2, and you finish it, go to number 3. When you finish it, go to number 4. Do everything you can do to accomplish it today, and then go to number 5. He said at the end of the day, you will have accomplished the most important things.
Mm-hmm.
And the other things won't matter as much, but you can put them on tomorrow's list. And Schwab, I said, well, how much do I owe you? He said, well, see what, I want you to put this into practice for a week. And if it works for you, then I want you to teach it to your employees. And in 6 weeks, you send me a check for whatever you think it was worth. 6 weeks later, he received a check in the mail for $25,000. In that day, that was a lot of money.
Right.
And Schwab later said, that's the best $25,000 investment I ever made. Well, here's a way to use that practically. Another way, you can do exactly what I just said, but here is the ABCD method of prioritizing a to-do list. A, things that must be done today. So do your list of things. And then A, I got 4 A's. I got to get these done. So my days of failure, I do this, except I number them 1, 2, 3, 4. But in my mind, I don't always write them down. But I count a day of failure if I didn't get the A's done.
Right.
You know, if I didn't. Now, sometimes you don't, because something else comes up that you had to deal with, or you didn't properly assign enough time. You thought you could do it in a day, and it turned out to be too much to get done. But it's still helpful because you've prioritized from the time your feet hit the floor in the morning. You know, you already know what you're going to try to do today. B is things that should be done today but don't have to be. C refers to things that must be done sometime but not immediately. And D, I want to do this but I don't have to. So you do A, B, C, D, assign. And then if you're using a computer, a spreadsheet, or just an email to yourself, you can rearrange them. You can put all the A's together, B's, like that. And I used to think this was a personal thing, but I've talked to enough people now that it seems to be a common thing. One of the great joys of a to-do list is marking things off, right? And that's the reward for it. So take the time to celebrate your successes and mark them off the list. And I leave them on my list for a day or two, and then I'll erase them and move others up the list. But I like to enjoy seeing, wow, I've gotten all these things done this week, and then moving on to new things. So I think that is a valuable lesson that you can see right here with Joshua and how he handled the 5 kings in a cave. Now let's move back into our section, to our notes section, and I got a note at verse 21. This is actually one of those sermons that's not been developed yet, but it's an idea for a sermon. In verse 21, and all the people returned to the camp to Joshua at Makkedah in peace. So they finished the job. They've now come back to the place where the kings have been. What he told them was put some rocks in front of the cave and don't let them get away.
Right.
And we're going to go fight. Now they finished fighting. They came back to the cave. So the next part of verse 21 says, none moved his tongue against any of the children of Israel. So we would say that the kings of the Amorites are not trash talking them anymore. They were before, but now they're not moving their tongue. So I put James 3, 1 through 11 there. That's the classic text on the tongue. And I think that there's an idea for a sermon there about times not to move your tongue, times to keep silent. And in fact, I did a study like that in the book of James. Let me see. I think I'll pull that out, put that on the screen real quick since I mentioned it. Times chapter 3.
While you're looking for that, one thing that I think runs parallel here is, throughout Joshua is the enemies that he faces. For example, you have an unknown enemy in Achan.
Right.
Then you have a underestimated enemy in Ai.
That's good.
Then you have a deceptive enemy in chapter 9, the Gibeonites. And then here you have a hostile enemy.
Wow.
And then you apply that from just a sin standpoint. We've touched on it in this. You touched on it, I think, last study with Satan's deception as far as, leading us away from the Lord. And you can apply all those to sin and persecution being the hostility that he has. And the theme that runs through all this, every enemy was defeated with God.
Didn't matter what kind of enemy.
Absolutely. Yeah. So whatever the tactics, whatever the techniques, God's capable of overcoming them. He overcomes them in different ways, obviously, but capable of overcoming them all.
Well, I think that would apply back where we had that Wiley sermon, a Wiley Foe sermon. I believe that would fit as like the subpoints for one of those points, because he is a wily foe that uses different methods. If he can't get one to work, then he'll use another one. All right, let me give you just briefly a couple of studies on the sins of the tongue. There are 3 kinds of talkers in James 3 that he talks about. One is abusive, second is evil, and then just plain liars. So we need to avoid those. And then the sin of gossip is something that many of us should hold our tongue with. Do not lift up your tongue against. So it's a sin that shows the true heart. Matthew 12:34. What comes out of my mouth indicates what's in my heart. And it's the sin of the hypocrite. And it's probably the most often committed sin of the tongue, telling tales, or gossiping about others. For somebody that's addicted to profanity, that they may use more profanity than gossip. But for some people, this will be the greatest temptation of the tongue, is the talking out of turn about somebody else. And it's a sin that takes no preparation. All you have to have is a thought, and either you're going to say it or you're not going to. So the key to overcoming sins of the tongue, of course, is to keep the heart pure, because out of it are the issues of life, Proverbs 23:7. So we want to make sure that we are keeping the spring pure, and then the stream will be pure. If you've got a corrupted stream, then everything down from it is going to be. If you got a corrupted thought process, then words, actions, attitudes will all be corrupted. So work on the heart. Now let's get back into our study in Joshua 10. We were at verse 21. Let's move on now to 24. The next note that I have is in 24, where what's happening here, I'll set the stage. They brought out the 5 kings out of the cave and made them lie down on the ground. And he tells his leaders, Joshua called all the men of Israel and said to the captains of the men of war which were with him. So these are his generals, his military leaders. He says, come up here, I want you to do something. Come near. Put your feet upon the necks of these kings. And they came near and put their feet upon the necks of them. Do you think they ever forgot that?
No, not at all.
There's no way. Here's a king, but I'm putting my foot on his neck as a soldier, as a leader. So the lesson here is seize teaching moments. Joshua had an opportunity to give them an experience, confidence, spoils of victory, encouragement. And he seized it. He didn't allow it. Go hang those kings. And doesn't even, no, he brings them out and he says, I want you to come over here. I want to teach you something. All right. So you and I need to do this. Seize teaching moments. There are memorable object lessons that come up that is true, especially with parenting, but it's also true in preaching. So I'll start with parenting. When your children are small and there's a rainbow, and they're like, ooh, what do you talk about?
Right.
You go back to Genesis 9. You say, there used to not be rainbows until Noah, and then God put the bow in the cloud. And that bow is up there to remind us that God will never flood the earth again. You don't have to worry about that. God promised. That's why that rainbow's there. Okay. Well, that's just an example, but Deuteronomy 6:4-9, the Shema, the Hear, O Israel, the Lord our Lord is. So in that context, verse 7, he says, speak of them to your children when you lie down, when you rise up, when you're in your house. In other words, as you go through your day, be talking about how the law, in that case, apply, how you can teach your children to remember the law. So same thing with parents and children. You see somebody drinking a beer at a table across from you in a restaurant. Come here. That guy over there is drinking beer. I don't ever want to see you drink beer. Children don't forget what you whisper. They remember it. You're making an impression. And impressions made early have time to be deep.
Right.
And if you make the same impression when he's 16 as when he's 6, probably won't go as deep. Hopefully it will. Depends on your relationship with him and his heart. But it works better when they're young. So that's what we see here. Seize teaching moments. Same thing is true of preaching. And I coach the students. It seems extemporaneous, but it doesn't have to be. For instance, if the lights go out when you're preaching, that's going to happen to you. Well, if you have a quick quip, and you quote 1 John 1, let us walk in the light, everybody's like, wow, that's a good verse right now, or if there's a loud clap of thunder and everybody's if you've got something to say about that, or if a baby cries out, really, it's everybody knows. You don't want to embarrass a parent or a child ever. Never do that. I sometimes would take the opportunity, normally just ignore it, but sometimes I'll say, aren't you glad we have children here today?
Mm-hmm.
I preach sometimes in churches that never have a disturbance at all, but everybody in there is 65 years and older. But nobody wants that. Thank you for bringing your children today.
Right.
Because that mother's feeling a little bit embarrassed. Everybody's kids cry sometimes. Yeah, you need to take them out if they're disturbing.
Right.
Go handle it. But we're glad that you're here and they're here, and we would never want you not to come because, my kid acts up sometimes. So bring them. That's where they need to be. So anyway, what I'm saying is watch for teaching moments. As a teacher, questions are teaching moments. I had someone when I was a young preacher. He was an old preacher at that time. Great man, loved him. And he was sort of in his second childhood a little bit.
Right.
But he always sat like on the third row back, and I preached from the floor. And so he was just right there. So I'd be preaching. I was a young preacher. I still don't know much, but I surely didn't know much back then. So he would say, Brother Webster, what does that next verse mean? And I was like, but those were some teaching moments. Or he would speak up and say, that reminds me of, everybody in there just heard what he said. And they're all, how's the preacher going to handle it? Or he really put him on the spot. Well, those are great opportunities to leave a lasting impression and so use them,
Right.
Use those teaching moments. That's what you see here with. All right, let's speed up. We've only got a little time left. So verse 27, without God, man's refuge becomes his tomb. That's a lesson from these 5 kings that hid in the cave, and then that's where they ended up being buried. Man's refuge became his tomb. So how would you apply that? His intellect, the majority of people, false religion, money, popularity, all those things people take refuge in. Well, all these people can't be wrong, so I'm okay. But that becomes a tomb.
Right.
Or they're shielded from necessity, need, and even the gospel. Now, how many times does the gospel make it to people in high office? I think in Acts 25, when I teach that, I say that Bernice and Agrippa, when they heard the gospel, that's very rare that they're shielded from that. You try to knock on their door and you're not going to get them, or whatever. So here you have people that hide and make a refuge of things that end up being their condemnation. All right, I think that, let me see. I wanted to get to those 12 lessons. So let me just put this on the screen quickly to show the Southern campaign, which is in green on your screen, which you can see was short. Shittim, where they left and they crossed over. Gilgal, which was not really a battle, but a place where they circumcised. Then they attacked Jericho and Ai, and now the central campaign's over. And now they go down to the southern campaign, which is in red on your screen there. And here's where we are right now, Makeda, where the cave is. We don't know exactly where that was, but it has to be close, somewhere right along in there. And there's the Valley of Ajalon, where he asked for the moon to stand still, so forth. Now I'm going to back up, and in the time we have left, just go through these lessons from Joshua 10. There are 12 of them, but some of them we've already covered, so we won't spend time on them. The first one we've covered, it's dangerous to have Canaanites among Israelites.
Right.
We saw that. The second lesson, leaders can get sidetracked and lose their focus. Well, we studied that. Then sidetrack leaders, sidetrack others. Well, that's the 4 kings who joined in with Adonai-Zedek. Sin pulls one farther in and brings one in conflicts that could have been avoided. We saw that with Joshua being pulled into that battle. Well, we didn't discuss that much. I'll just mention that, if you marry the wrong person, you marry outside the Lord's will, then that's going to bring a lot of trouble into your life that you wouldn't have had. The same thing with if you started drug use or alcohol use, that bad decision can bring so many more conflicts in your life. Proverbs 23 talks about who hath babbling, who hath contentions, who hath redness of eyes. Contentions. When you start drinking, you're going to start arguing.
Right.
You're going to get in fights. You're going to have, your loved ones are going to resist that in many cases. And that's how you apply that. Then, this one we did not cover, but the sun, moon, and stars obey God's voice. You see that here where the sun stood still. And you could put Psalm 19, 1 through 6, which discusses God's creation. Then number 6, we saw this when the Lord fights for his people, referred to many times. And then do not move your tongue against God's people. We saw that in verse 21. And we should be careful about criticism of elders. You're not supposed to do that unless you got 2 or 3 witnesses, right?
Right.
Yeah. What about criticizing the preacher? Well, if you criticize the preacher in front of your kids and then your preacher preaches on something your kids needed to hear, they'll probably dismiss it. It's like mom and dad don't like this preacher. They don't even listen. So you're shooting your family in the foot by criticizing the preacher. So forth. You can make other applications. The next one is put your feet on the necks of your enemies. In this sense, do not fear them.
Right.
You may have enemies because of you're a Christian or because of what you stand for, but don't be intimidated by it because God is on your side, not on their side. Why should we be intimidated when we're saying truth, living truth? Too many times we're the ones that cower and keep our mouth shut when they should be the ones cowering and keeping their mouth shut because what they're saying is the opposite of what God once said. Now, you could put Matthew 10:28 there as New Testament corollary. Verse 9, or number 9 on our list of 12, good leaders seize teaching moments. 10, miracles give way to natural law. We did not cover that, but you can see that in verse 13 and 27. And that's the natural order. In the New Testament, there was a time of miracles, and then when that which is perfect has come, the New Testament was completed. The miraculous age ended. Number 11, without God, man's refuge becomes his tomb. And then this one, number 12, I really like this point. Some battles take longer, but victory will ultimately be the Lord's. So verse 32 and 35 show that lesson, and I'll just make the application. The application is sometimes you've tried to convert someone for a long time, and you didn't succeed. Does God not want you to do it? Oh, he does. Just keep trying, Good point. God's not going to overrule their free will, but hopefully you'll break through. And there are other battles over addiction we talked about earlier. That may take some time, but God wants you to win out, so just stay with it. So some battles take longer than others, but stay with it, and God can give the victory.
That's great. Thank you, Allen. Join us next time.